So as I said in the opening prayer, we have on the 21st, it was National Indigenous Peoples Day. And a lot of us think about First Nations people when we celebrate that day. But of course, in Canada, we have two other groups of people that are considered to be Indigenous peoples, the Inuit from the north, as well as the Métis. And so in my family, my maternal grandfather was Métis, but we didn't grow up. So everything I tell you is going to be things that I've just learned on my own. We didn't grow up with a lot of Métis traditions, because like many other Canadian people, we have lots of different other influences in our lives. And not surprisingly, there's actually an awful lot of people who have Indigenous blood in them, whose families would have worked away from that because of the racism and segregation that was present historically. So just a little bit about that I've learned from the Manitoba Métis Federation, as well as the Métis Nation of British Columbia, about the Métis people and where they came about. Again, I'm not an expert. If anybody wants to know anything, the University of Manitoba and the Manitoba Métis Federation has a ton of information. I took a really great course called Métis 101, and it was so interesting and entertaining. Manitoba, so the Métis people, Métis means mixed in French. And so Métis people were from when settlers came, and there was a lot of Indigenous people here, and not surprisingly, the people started to mix, and out of the combination of primarily French and primarily Cree traditions, there sprung a new tradition, and Métis people had their own language, Michif. They had their own ceremonies, their own structure of government, their own currency, their own land. So Manitoba is actually one of the only provinces in Canada that is named with an Indigenous word. Manitoba, I believe, means gift from God in Cree, I think, but I could be wrong on that. So somebody can look up their own history. So not surprisingly, a lot of the dishes that we see as well so tourtière, I know, as a French Canadian dish because my sister-in-law is French Canadian from Saskatchewan. So she introduced me to it. But when I started to look into, well, is there something we could do that would be from a Métis tradition? It turns out that tourtière is also a Métis dish. Again, not surprising, because people were cooking with the same foods. They were sharing different traditions and crossing over, much like we still do today. Some of our foods that we eat here in Vancouver have different origins to them, and they came here, they morphed into what they are now, and maybe changed a little bit, and are celebrated with new traditions. So I think about kind of one of the family traditions we had growing up. We always had Chinese food on New Year's Eve. Well, I'm guessing that that's not the food we were eating, wouldn't be considered Chinese food in China. And the tradition is probably not also not something that they do in China, because they have a different New Year's. So it's, looking back, it's not surprising that the Métis Nation grew up with adopting many cultures and making them their own and mixing together. So it's quite a rich tradition. What happened to them was a little bit different than we're hearing an awful lot about residential schools. There's not a huge history of residential school for the Métis people. What happened when Manitoba joined Canada is everybody was given a script of land. So in my genealogy, we have script numbers that are attached to the people and my ancestors, and that gave you land. And so because nobody wanted at the time, we all know about the genocide of Indigenous people, so you couldn't actually claim the land unless you could speak English. Well, they spoke Michif or French, but not, or Cree or other Indigenous languages, but not English. So they didn't get the land. So a lot of Métis people were homeless and could not actually be educated because you had to own land to access schools at that time. So it's a different type of suffering and a different type of genocide that was imposed on them. So that's all the stuff we're going to talk about. So tourtière meat pie, that's actually what it is. It is, I gave the recipe. It's a very simple dish to make. It is, you use ground pork. So you can use ground pork. The pork is one of the most important pieces. And the reason it's important is that it gives the fat content to the meat dish. So I got this from Hot Pots. It's you use a pound of pork, ground pork, just pop it into the pan. I always start everything on high, but it's supposed to be medium high, but just figure it out. Half a pound of ground beef. Again, like traditionally you would use whatever meat you had, game meat. Typically, so I've had tourtière with buffalo, I've had it with moose, I've had it with caribou, I've had it with venison, but again, the pork is the one piece that actually gives it the moisture. So super easy to cook. You just mix up the meat, and you're adding a little bit of seasoning. So I add a teaspoon of salt, sage, and thyme out of our garden. So a little bit of that. I used ground onion, garlic, and carrots. So there's lots of people that put potato in theirs. There's some people that put rice in, which again, talk about fusion. Where did rice come from back in the day? It came actually up from Mexico. And interestingly enough, I once went to a conference with a historian who told me, and I'm repeating what they told me, I don't know if it's true, I didn't ever fact check them, that rice is present in Mexican dishes because of the exploration of people from the Far East. So it came from China, Japan, etc. Again, don't know that's true, don't know that's false. So use a little bit of nutmeg, about a half a teaspoon of nutmeg. You can spice this however you want to, whatever is your pleasure. Cinnamon makes it quite nice. It goes well with the ground meat. So a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then the magic ingredients for all dishes from anywhere in Canada east of probably the Rocky Mountains is maple syrup. So that goes in there. And then you're going to mix it up enough to make the meat brown. So if it gets too dry, I'm going to put my camera on, I think, with my phone and see if I can get a good picture of what's going on here. Oops. Of course, then I have to learn how to use my phone. Here we go. Okay, so you see that?
No, we can't see it.
Okay, yeah, okay, there you go. So much
Oh,
for
wait.
If you can hold it again, I can spotlight that camera.
Okay. How's that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So it's actually only takes about 5 minutes. I did find that when I made it yesterday, when I made the meat, it does, some recipes call for
You're there.
Yep, we can see you. Yep.
Okay, cool. Some recipes call for water or beef stock to be added. I found it was too runny last night when I tried with water. So I didn't use that. So this takes only about 5 to 10 minutes to cook. So, and then I'm going to roll out the pastry. So Julie, if you want to do your garlic-scape now,
Okay.
that would be good. And then we can get on to making the pie.
So I'm making a garlic-scape pesto. And one of the reasons, to be fair, why I'm making it is because I just picked like almost 100 scape from my garden. It's a little bit early. I don't know if everyone knows what garlic-scape is, but it's basically the part that grows out of the garlic that you need to snip off so that the rest of the nutrients can go to the garlic bulb and it will flourish. And then you're left with this, which you can do a few things. I mean, you can just cut it up and freeze it. You can put it in stews and soup and whatever. But in my case, I am making garlic-scape pesto. So the recipe calls for, and I will get Rob to mute me while I'm doing the food processor because it's going to be a bit loud. So the recipe I've got is, this will be my fourth, actually I'm doing 1.5 times because that's how much I've got left, but it's a cup of garlic-scape. Actually, I'm going to use 1.5 cups because I want to get rid of it. And then we use, for a cup of garlic-scape, you would then use 1/2 cup of packed just basil, and you pack it firmly. So you don't have to pre-chop it if you're using a, well, you don't pre-chop it, everything's going in the food processor. So anyways, and then I'm going to do half again, sort of, and then all I'm going to do at this point is put it in the food processor for 30 seconds. Do you want to mute them, Rob?
She's very brave doing that in a white shirt.
Okay, so that's 30 seconds, whatever. Generally, I'll just make sure everything got pushed down. And next up, I'm gonna add cashews. Now, you can add any nut or you can eliminate nuts. You don't need to add them. This recipe calls for cashews. I've also done pine nuts and walnuts. So it's 1/3 cup. I'm gonna add a bit more, again, just because I did 1.5 times the recipe. That can mute me. Okay, so now we're gonna add in, again, this is based on a 1 cup of garlic-scape, 1/2 cup of olive oil, and you're just gonna drizzle it in and then push everything down as you need to. But I'm gonna add a bit more than that, but last, you.
While she's doing that, I just added in the chat that if you are allergic to nuts, like I am, you can add sunflower seeds or pumpkin seeds instead of the nut. It has a different flavor, but it still tastes good. And if you don't have garlic scapes in a garden, you can find them at farmers markets at this time of year. Although they might be it depends. Mine in the garden aren't ready yet, but depends on where your garden is.
Okay, so final stage, I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons and a bit of lemon juice, 3 teaspoons probably, and a bit. And then salt, so it's half a teaspoon of salt. And all of this is to taste. I mean, at the end of the day, you're gonna taste it and you're gonna adjust it as you want for salt, pepper, lemon, even oil. And I'm gonna add some pepper in. So the one thing about this is I freeze it in, you can freeze it in ice cube trays, you can freeze it in little mason jar, like little. And I do not add the Parmesan cheese in until I'm actually using the pesto, because it just changes the flavor a bit and you're just not meant to. So I have, two batches here. Can you see it? And this is the most recent batch. So what I'm going to do is actually after this is I'm going to combine them both, mix them up. And honestly, if you're just doing a single serve, the food processor doesn't get it fine enough. And then I'll adjust the taste based on my taste, right? Whether I want more lemon, more olive oil. And if you can always just freeze it this way and add more olive oil later. But essentially, it freezes really well. You can use it for gnocchi, you can use it for pasta, you can use it for fish, you can use it for everything. Got it right? All from these. So if anybody wants to try it, they can let me know and I'm happy to share. But that's it. So I'm gonna go back upstairs.
How much Parmesan do you put in after like you thawed it?
Yeah, so and you know, it's really to taste, but it's half a cup of grated Parmesan. But I hate the mess it makes in the pot. So often I'll just put a little bit in the pesto and then I'll just put the Parmesan on the side. I don't find that putting Parmesan in pesto really, I don't know, that's my preference, but I don't find that it's that much better. I'll put it in, but I'm more inclined to put it on the side so that it doesn't stick to my pot and then somebody has to clean it.
When you say stick to your pot, so you're using this as a seasoning in like spaghetti or something, or do you put it like on bread? How do you eat this?
You can do it so I'll make a pasta and then I'll drain the pasta and then I'll put this in with the cheese stirred around and we serve it like that. Gnocchi is exactly the same. I'll cook the gnocchi and then I'll put the gnocchi back in the pot with the pesto. never done it on bread, but we've used it with fish. But I mean, you can use it in any way. You could do it on pizza, right? You could do it in any way you want. But it's just, I find if I'm throwing it back in the pot and reheating the pasta with the pesto that has cheese in, most of the cheese sticks to the pot and doesn't stay in the pasta. And then I'd rather just serve it as a side. I don't know. That's just my personal preference. It doesn't mean. Yeah.
Cheese is sticky.
This cheese is sticky and it's horrible to clean up.
The cleanup is the deal.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I don't have to clean if I cook. So, but I'm still cognizant of the fact I wouldn't want to clean it. Yeah. So that's it. And the only other thing I would say, if anybody, you can get garlic-scape at the farmers markets right now, and you should be able to get it for the next month. And I went all over the place today looking for basil, and the best place, I mean, I couldn't even find it. And I didn't want Thai basil. I wanted like local basil, but Langley Food Market on Austin Avenue has a huge bunch for $2.50. Like, that's incredible.
Langley
And
Farmer.
Langley, yeah, it is the best. And it was really, I used 1 1/4 pack. I bought 2 and I used 1 1/4 and I did 4 servings. So yeah, it was pretty good. Anyways, I'm gonna pop upstairs.
You can spotlight me again if you want, Jen.
You can leave if you want.
Okay, there we go. So I'm just gonna hold this up a little bit. So I'm a little bit messy when I'm trying to cook fast. So the pastry topping's a bit messier than what I would do, but it's a double crust. And then when you cook it so that start with foil on top, 425 oven, and for 20 minutes, just so the crust doesn't burn. And then take the topping off. And then when you serve the tortilla, you're wanting to have it set a bit from the oven so you don't cut it as soon as you take it out. And so I'll just show you what I took out of the oven, which is the one I made yesterday. Yeah, there you go. And that's what we're gonna have for dinner tonight. And then I'll just bring over so the meat is finished cooking. I'll just, if you just want to switch the camera, I'll hold my phone over top of the
Oh yeah.
there
Oh,
you go.
nice.
That's what it looks like. So it's like 5 to 10 minutes to make the filling, but then you do have to let it cool before you put it in the pastry, because obviously it will not do well when it melts the butter in the pastry. And the pastry is better made with, or melts the fat in the pastry. It's better made with lard for tortilla, and I don't know why that is. It could be better made with lard because that's what they would have had. So it develops its own legend, but I don't know enough about cooking to know why that is. Maybe the butter and the meat together. So I would always, I'm kind of a recipe cook, but not when I'm making something like this. So I would just have a taste of it too to see if it's seasoned properly. Yeah, delicious.
So
My
Geri,
opinion.
I have a couple questions. First of all, like, does the actual original recipe you call for cinnamon and nutmeg, did they actually even have that back in the like early 19th? Yeah.
Yeah, because remember, people came over from this country was colonized by people from Britain, and they colonized also India for the spice
Oh,
trade.
okay. Yeah.
So those
okay.
things, that's why you do see some of that that crossover, especially with the Métis people. You'll see a little bit of the crossover that comes from incorporating settlers into the new and emerging culture.
Okay, interesting. And then my other question is, if you were going to freeze this, is it better to cook it and freeze it, or freeze it before it's cooked?
Yeah, you cook it, then cool it and freeze it, and you can leave it freezer for 3 to 4 months if you want to. Lots of times people will do them, like they'll do one for Thanksgiving
Yeah.
and one for Christmas.
Okay, nice. Good. Anyone else have any questions for either myself or Geri, or just anything they want to chat
What
about?
do you, what on the tortilla, what do you serve for side dish? What is that it, or you have something else besides it?
We usually do like a salad or something, but it kind of comes up with traditional dishes, just like often what you kind of see in Western culture. They get served alongside the other traditional dishes that come out. So you'll have it at Thanksgiving dinner, and all the other things that go on Thanksgiving dinner table will end up beside it. So turkey and mashed potatoes and all the other things you put there. But yeah, for sure. Traditionally, whatever people had, because it's keeping them warm in the winter. It's a winter thing.
I have a recipe and I made it once, and I from Montreal but grew up in Winnipeg, and I think I got it in Winnipeg, and it was like pages long. And so it's interesting to see a simple recipe, because this thing I never made it again because it took so long to make, and I can't remember why now. I'll have to dig out the recipe, but this sounds a lot less intimidating.
Yeah, it's super easy, and I think tasty. I think it's really tasty. I like it because meat, sometimes we just have meat, like, I don't know, get used to the traditional kind of
Mhm.
meat with barbecue sauce on it or something like that. But throwing in cinnamon, you could throw in mace too if you're using game meat. You could throw in mace. That helps to take the kind of gaminess away from it.
I did have a look at that cookbook you shared. It was interesting. I thought it was, I just haven't explored that part of the cuisine and cooking and culture. So thank you for that.
I listened to a radio program on Tuesday it was a Métis person actually talking about art, and how often we see we don't see, even though Métis people actually are quite a large population of what we consider Indigenous or Aboriginal people in Canada, their artwork is not that present in museums and whatnot. Although, you could argue the other side of it is that most of the stuff we see in museums was stolen. So, there's that. There's nothing's ever black and white. So yeah, but it's I learned a ton. The course I went to was free. It was a morning, and it's put on in Manitoba. There's quite a few people with Métis heritage, of course, and they can get grants to go to university. And what they found was that people would get grants based on their genealogy, but they had no idea about the Métis people. So they put together this Métis 101, and I learned a ton about my own heritage. And I started to think about how much we think about, for myself, my father was a New Zealander, my mother Canadian, and so we sort of think about those two dominant cultures. And even like when I applied for my citizenship, my husband kind of said, well, what do you want to do that for? You guys didn't grow up like that. And I'm like, well, why do you call yourself Irish? You guys have been here for 4 generations. So what's Irish about you? Like, why not? So it's kind of been a very interesting journey for me to kind of think about that piece that's really been ignored in my life and lost a little bit.